We'll be hearing from Dr. Alexey Peshkovsky, who is the president and CSO for Industrial Sonomechanics, LLC. His professional experience includes over 20 years as a researcher, entrepreneur, product developer, and scientific director in both academic and industrial sectors, mainly focusing on instrumentation design and process development. Dr. Peshkovsky is the author of over 40 scientific papers, utility patents, conference presentations, and books. Today, he will be educating us on water-compatible cannabis extracts, nanoemulsions. That's a sentence. Dr. Alexey Peshkovsky, everyone. This is here for you. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and this is... Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to present and for being here. I'll be talking about water-compatible cannabis extract nanoemulsions. Some people call them water-soluble formulations. I'll talk about their benefits and how to make them. Our business model is to enable our clients to make their own, so you guys can do what you do best, making the finished beverage products out of them. There are many ways to deliver cannabis into the bloodstream. Everybody knows what those are. We don't have to go through them. Long story short, you can eat it as an edible. You can vape it, dab it, smoke it, put it on your tongue, in your eyes. Even rectal delivery exists. All these different methods exist. And perhaps a big reason for why these things coexist is that there's no clear winner so far. Or there hasn't been one. Every method has advantages and, more importantly, disadvantages, so you kind of decide what you want to do. But if you could just drink it like alcohol, then why wouldn't you just do that? Nobody vapes alcohol. Nobody uses rectal delivery for it. You wouldn't put it on your tongue. I mean, I wouldn't put it on my tongue. With nanoemulsions, you can basically do just that, as most people by now already know. So I agree with the previous speaker and others who basically think that it's going to take over. I also believe it's going to take over. There are some hurdles to overcome, probably on the business side, on the regulatory side, but it's going to happen, and it's going to take advantage of the entire culture, so it's probably going to be pretty big. This is what a nanoemulsion dosing looks like. When it's properly made, it's translucent. So in this case, it's 20 milligrams per milliliter of CBD. Nanoemulsion, you put it in water, give it a swoosh, it disappears into it. It'll be stable, it'll never separate, it will not lose potency unless you expose it to UV light or something like that, not nanoemulsion related stuff. Very importantly, it's translucent if you want it to be, so you can make it that way. It won't alter your beverage visually, and it will give you the benefits: bioavailability increase, the onset time shortening, and easy compatibility with beverages. Basically, bringing it closer to what alcohol behaves like. Alcohol is fast. It absorbs completely, and everybody knows what to expect from it. If you ate versus you didn't eat, there's a difference, but basically you know what a drink will feel like. Nanoemulsions, although they're not truly, rigorously speaking, water-soluble formulations, they behave as if they were. So for all intents and purposes, it's the same thing. There are several types of water-compatible formulations out there. Macroemulsions are something that everybody knows about. It's when you use a basic surfactant, phospholipids, lecithin or something, and use a basic mixer and just mix oil and water that way. They make large drops. They don't really give you all of these benefits, maybe a little bit, but they separate. And so they don't really need to be considered. It's not a product that you can really use. Microemulsions are what the pharmaceutical industry used to use before they figured out that nanoemulsions actually work better. Microemulsions are, it's an unfortunate choice of terminology. Micro doesn't mean they're micron size. They're actually nano size. And many people call them nanoemulsions, although it's incorrect. The way they work is you need to use a lot of surfactant, generally harsh surfactants, so much that you change the properties of water and oil basically dissolves in that. Or you can create micelles which can swell with the oil going on the inside. So it looks a bit like a nanoemulsion, but it just uses 10 times more surfactant and the choice is limited. So before there was an option to make nanoemulsions, the pharma industry used microemulsions because it works, but you have to be very careful with the surfactants and the regulations kick in and stuff like that. The difference between them and nanoemulsions, the reason the nanoemulsions can get away with using a lot less surfactant is that you will use mechanical energy, some sort of preferably an ultrasonic liquid processor that creates a lot of shear that will break the droplets apart mechanically, and that doesn't stay in the product, unlike the surfactants if you use the chemical action to do that, right? Now, in between the two, there are liposomes. Liposomes are great, and many people call their formulation liposomal. Technically, liposomes are for water-in-water formulations. They have water on the inside. You can see that there's a blue kind of interior that's water, and outside is also water. And it has kind of like a biological cell. It has a skin layer, so the oils can go in there, but the loading is low. So you can't really deliver a lot that way. Plus, they're pretty difficult to make, and the choice of surfactants is also limited. Nanoemulsions, if you have the equipment, basically let you avoid all of these drawbacks. The amount of surfactants is a lot lower, less than oil, actually. You can use very mild, tasteless, very compliant food-grade surfactants to make them. And they're not really difficult to make if you have the formulation. So it's something we offer. So if you go in that direction, no R&D is really required. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Basic components of nanoemulsions are, there's going to be a carrier oil, preferably about twice as much as your cannabis active. That needs to be there for a number of reasons. There's your bioactive, so CBD, THC, or whatever. It doesn't even have to be cannabis related. It could just be a hydrophobic drug that you want to deliver. You will need a surface active agent to stabilize it after it's made and aid in making it. So those are surfactants, most likely more than one. We recommend using some preservatives for microbial stability, something mild, something food grade. And a nanoemulsion is, there are many definitions of what is a nanoemulsion and what's not. A good one in my mind is the one that requires it to have medium droplet size distribution under 300 nanometers. It turns out that at that level, things become stable. So nanoemulsions with, let's say, 250 nanometer D50, it's a common method of measuring the entire distribution. That means 50% of your material is in droplets below that size and 50 above. So when that is at about 200, 250, the nanoemulsions tend to be stable. They don't separate anymore. If you want them to be translucent, then everything has to be below 100 nanometers. It just so happens that at that level, at that size, they don't interfere with light. So the light can travel unobstructed, therefore you get progressive translucency. And ideally, for good level of translucency and complete transparency after dosing, you want the formulation to be about 50 or below, between 20 and 40, maybe 50 nanometers in D50. Now, we talked a little bit about this before. It's worth mentioning that nanoemulsions are not new. The terminology might be new, but nanoemulsion formulations are very familiar. The English breakfast tea is actually, based on the distribution, is exactly the same as what a good nanoemulsion would be. Coffee, McDonald's coffee is actually pretty nice and symmetric. This is beer, Corona beer. It's kind of funny. It has two nanoemulsions in one. It has really small droplets, probably micelles of some surface active agent in the beer, and then something around 100, probably oil extract. So they have been around. Beyond that, in order to bring nanoemulsions, in order to bring hydrophobic actives into your body, into your bloodstream, or any fats for that matter, a body creates something called mixed micelles. I'll mention them a little bit later. Mixed micelles are also kind of like a nanoemulsion formulation internally produced by your body with the surfactants that are present in the small intestine, phospholipids and bile salts. So we are a carrier of nanoemulsion technology, even if we don't, even if we don't know it. This is what happens with the reduction of droplet sizes. Things become more translucent. So when you're above 100, nanoemulsions are milky. Milk is a typical nanoemulsion that is milky, being milk. Then once you get under 100, you can see light going through it a little bit. At 50, it's going through. This is concentrated, so once you dose it, it'll be maybe slightly cloudy, maybe not. And then when you're below 50, things become practically transparent very quickly. We have some samples at our table, 60, so I can show you how to dose it and what it looks like. Bioavailability. So this is a huge question, very important to answer it properly. I'm not aware of any studies done specifically on cannabis that would demonstrate exactly what happens with the bioavailability as a function of droplet size. But it has been done for many other bioactives, for pharmaceutical agents. And it seems that the increase is roughly the same no matter what drug you're considering. And that's probably because it's not about the drug, it's about how you're going to deliver it. So it's more of a property of the vehicle of delivery. And in that sense, we can make indirect assumptions about what it would be for the cannabis delivery. So this is a very good study. They created a bunch of nanoemulsions and measured the blood concentrations of a drug. So at 400 nanometers, you can see that you're about 5 times lower than you are at 25 nanometers. So the bioavailability increase, or at least the intensity increase, is about a factor of 5 compared to that. But if you compare that with just straight oil, it would probably be another increase of sorts. So you can expect somewhere between 5 and 7. Some people claim 9. I think it's a bit ambitious. I would stay with about 5, roughly speaking. The bioavailability increase compared to just straight oil as an addable, for example, delivery. Now, a little bit about the mechanism. We don't have to go through this whole thing, but it's important to talk about the blue part. I don't think I have a pointer, do I? I don't know. But anyway, just look at where the drops are, the yellow drops and the blue background. So when you consume an oil or fat, it arrives in your small intestine as a big drop, or maybe several big drops. Now, at that point, your body can't absorb it because it has to be at the wall of the small intestine. But there is something called unstirred aqueous layer that goes along the walls. So it has to be able to travel through water to get there, and it can't because it's an oil and it doesn't mix with water properly. So your body has lipases, basically enzymes that will digest the triglyceride oils, making them able to travel, but they have to have the surface to do so. So what happens first is you have to emulsify it yourself in your small intestine before it can be properly digested. So surfactants come in, some phospholipids, bile salts come in, and there's some peristaltic motion of the small intestine, which makes an emulsion. As soon as that happens, lipases can get in, cleave the glycerin from the triglyceride, or remove a couple of fatty acids. So from triglycerides, you will be making free fatty acids and monoglycerides. Those get assembled with the surfactants into what's called mixed micelles. And this is basically the whole point. We don't have to go beyond that. Mixed micelles are small droplets of about 10 nanometers in size or so, with some distribution, that are water compatible. They're not dissolved, but they look like they are. And they can travel through water and get to the absorption site, get to the interocyte cells. After that, they can get absorbed, and then a couple of things can happen. They can go into the lymphatic system or into the blood, and we can get into that. But I think for the purposes of today, or at least for now. This is all the explanation that we need. The reason that edibles take so long to kick in, and after that they're so gradual and only build up to the highest intensity after 4 hours or so, is that this process has to happen first. And it's a very gradual and slow process. And then for an hour, there's nothing. After that, they start slowly coming in because some of the mixed micelles are made and they got to where they need to go. More is being made, so you are feeling it, but more is coming in. So it's not a flat, it's not a jump. It's not like having a beverage, an alcoholic beverage, and having the alcohol all come in at once. It's going to be very slowly coming in. After an hour and a half, 2 hours, you probably think you didn't take enough, then you take another dose. Then you're probably in space, you know, following Apollo. And if you don't, then you still have to kind of wait forever, and you're never really comfortable because you pass your comfort level, then it's too much, and then it stays in you because the liver is getting rid of it, but more is still in your small intestine, still coming in, so it's a mess. But the beauty of the nanoemulsions is that they are essentially mixed micelles. Once you drink that, you don't have to do any post-processing internally. They can just get absorbed, which is what alcohol does, kind of, except alcohol is even better. It's really, it doesn't need mixed micelles. It's just individual molecules traveling. But it's close enough. So you consume basically a pre-digested oil. That's what it really comes down to. So it acts really quickly, and it goes in completely and all at once. 10 minutes onset or so, depending on who you ask and if they ate or not, and little things like that, but maybe 10, maybe 5, maybe 15 or so. Goes up, stays flat, after 3 hours gone. This is what we offer for people to be able to make these things themselves. Basically, there are two pieces of the puzzle. You need the high shear equipment to be able to create the droplets, and you need the formulation with all the components that I mentioned before, which we offer in this pre-mixed state, which we call the nanostabilizer. It has the carrier oil and the surfactants. Everything is food grade. Everything is very compliant, completely tasteless. So if your extract has the taste, we will not interfere with it. We will not change it. We will not remove it either. So what you start with is what you get. We don't do masking at this stage, but you could. Between these two things, you don't really have to do any R&D. It's a plug-and-play situation. The system comes pre-assembled. You don't really have to learn anything. It's basically like a food processor. You just have to know what to put and where and what ratio, so we give you a description of what to do. Nanostabilizer removes the need to develop your own formulation, but if you want to develop your own formulation, by all means, we don't prevent you in any way from doing it. We don't require you to use nanostabilizer. It's just there for convenience. And we suggest a ratio that we believe is a good ratio of nanostabilizer to your active ingredient to use. But if you're willing to live with a slightly bigger droplet size, a little less translucency, for many people it's okay, depending on the dose and where it's going, then you can use less nanostabilizer, so you can play with costs and things like that. But basically it's all done, and we make it as easy as we can possibly make it for our customers to do it without them having to have any special background. This is what a system looks like. This is our medium system. It can make up to 25,000 doses per hour, so 5 liters of nanoemulsion at 50 milligrams per milliliter. If 10 mg is your dose, so that's 25,000 doses you can make in 1 hour. That's not counting prep, obviously, and cleanup and all that, just the running time. We have 3 levels of these systems. So the lab scale system, LSP 500, that's for basic R&D. It's not a production system. Then the medium scale system is bench scale production, the one I mentioned. Our large scale system, and we have some pieces of it here that you can look at, it can make up to 100,000 doses an hour, which is generally enough for even large companies. This is what the process looks like. Basically, the droplet size distribution evolution with time as you process. So in this example, 20 liters of nanoemulsion at 20 milligrams per milliliter of CBD. were made with the medium system, the bench scale system, and nanostabilizer. And you can see that as the droplet size, it starts above 100, and then it progresses all the way down to below 20, 19 nanometers. And you can see what happens with translucency. It starts milky, and as you go along, it becomes translucent. So in our system, we incorporate a sight glass, so we recommend that you have one there, that you can just watch what happens, and while it's milky, you need to keep going. Once you're translucent to a certain degree, you can stop. Otherwise, if you were always milky, you would have to use specialized equipment, dynamic light scattering or something, and that's pretty expensive. With translucency, luckily, you can just see it. You can also see if it's losing its stability. I haven't seen a case where it would. There's no reason why it should, but if for some reason it did, it would become cloudy because the droplets would grow. So it's another kind of simple level of quality control. Obviously, if you need real numbers, then you have to measure it. And we are now starting real bioavailability studies. It's a slow process. There's a lot of stuff to get through, but we do have some volunteer data where they would just be reporting how high they feel, what they feel, based on 4 different formulations. So the first 2, the red one and green one, is basically an edible, or similar to an edible. It's MCT oil with 10 milligrams of THC consumed by 5 volunteers in a capsule. So we made sure that it got swallowed properly. And the difference between them is the fed versus a fasted state. So the red line is a fasted state, so empty stomach. And you can see that, well, there was a delay, but it tried to go in, just the intensity was really low. So the red line kind of, it wants to go up, but then it just kind of doesn't. On an empty stomach, edibles don't really work very well. Edibles might, because the edible itself will have the oil. But if you just consumed cannabis in a capsule, it would just need a much bigger dose. The bioavailability of doing it that way is extremely low. So we allowed people to eat after 2 hours. And you can see what happened. It went up, and then it was already going down into nothing. And then once they ate, it actually kicked in, and it became a normal edible on a full stomach. The green line, by the way, is what happens on a full stomach. There's a delay. After 2 hours, it starts really coming in, and it peaks at 4, as expected. So if you start it on an empty stomach and then ate, it kind of goes into that also. So it's hanging out waiting for food. It's trying to go in, but it can't without oils and fats. Now, with nanoemulsions, not only do you get higher intensities, although intensities are not really fair to compare here because it's just self-reported high. It's really not a very solid number. But you can judge the onset of action. It's very quick. And in our experiments, we were actually surprised to notice that it doesn't even really matter if you ate or not. So the blue line is fasted. It goes in very efficiently, very quickly, lasts for a couple hours, and then it's gone. On a full stomach, the onset time is just a little bit slower, and that's probably due to gastric emptying. So things don't really get absorbed through the stomach. They just don't. Alcohol does a little bit, but oils don't. They need to be in the small intestine. So if you ate, the food is sitting there and waiting its turn to empty into the small intestine, and it happens in stages. So that probably creates a bit of a delay. Once it's there, it goes in quickly. But the reason that the lines are different, and we're going to study this in detail, is probably because once, if you are absorbed on an empty stomach, you go into the blood and then into the liver. The bioavailability is probably a bit lower. The area under the curve is clearly lower. And that's because you first go into the liver. With THC, it's a little more complicated. I mentioned this before because you make hydroxy-11 as a first metabolite in your liver, and that has its own psychoactivity, so things get a little bit complicated. But if you do have food in you first, that creates something called chylomicrons in your enterocyte cells, in the absorption cells in the small intestine, and those channel cannabinoids into the lymphatic system that goes around the liver. So there is just more cannabis available to you, and it lasts longer. And still after 4 hours, approximately, it's over. So in that way, it kind of mimics an alcoholic beverage, except a bit in reverse. So alcoholic beverage replacement manufacturers should have that in mind, take it into account, because on an empty stomach, alcohol hits you more. And I don't know if it lasts longer, but I always feel like it does. On a full stomach, you don't feel it as much, and it's kind of like more manageable, and I think it lasts less. With cannabis, it's the opposite. You're going to need to know that. And with this, thank you for your attention, and I'll take questions.
Thank you